I used to believe churches were safe places because they were quiet. I thought silence meant peace, but I was wrong. The church was called Covenant Hill, a stone building with tall windows and wooden doors heavy enough to make entry feel intentional. The first time I walked in, a woman named Ruth handed me a bulletin and smiled like she already knew me. She said, "We are glad you are here. Not welcome, but glad." That word felt heavier. Pastor Joel preached about obedience that morning, not aggressively, but casually, like it was common sense. He said God speaks through authority, and that confusion comes from resisting order. People nodded, and I did too. After the service, a man named Mark approached me. He wore a blazer that looked too formal for Sunday and said he coordinated volunteers. He asked if I had time during the week, and I said yes. That was enough. At first, it was harmless, stacking chairs, running cables, and locking doors. These were small things that made me useful without making me visible. People thanked me, and that part mattered. I had not realized how much until later. Ruth remembered my coffee order. Pastor Joel asked how my job was going. And Mark texted me scripture verses at night as encouragement. Soon. My schedule revolved around Covenant Hill with rehearsals, meetings, and prayer nights. When I skipped one, Mark asked if everything was okay, not angrily, but with concern. Concern can be a leash if you let it. One night after a leadership meeting I had not known I was invited to, Pastor Joel asked me to stay. He closed the office door gently, and that was the first time I noticed how often doors were closed there. He thanked me for my servant heart and said some people are chosen to lead publicly, while others are called to support invisibly. Both are important, he said, but not equal. He asked about my upbringing, my doubts, and my mistakes. I answered honestly again. After that, the tone shifted. When I asked questions during Bible study, Mark would redirect me. When I hesitated to volunteer, Ruth would look disappointed. Disappointed feels like betrayal. Then there was Hannah. Hannah was 19, soft-spoken, and always early. She worked with the children's group, and Pastor Joel praised her often, perhaps too often. One Sunday, she stopped coming. People noticed, but did not ask. The silence was coordinated. 2 weeks later, Hannah's father, Richard, showed up. He was not part of the church. He stood during the service and asked where his daughter was. Mark and 2 other men moved quickly to guide Richard outside, while Pastor Joel continued speaking without pause. Afterward, Pastor Joel addressed us, saying attacks against the church would come, and that false stories are tools of the enemy. No names were spoken, but every name was understood. That night, Mark texted me saying leadership had concerns about my attitude. He said I seemed distracted, and that pride often disguises itself as discernment. I apologized, and I hated myself for it, but I did. After that, I was slowly removed with no announcement or confrontation. I stopped receiving messages and was no longer asked to help. People still smiled, which was the cruel part. I sat alone during services, watching new volunteers arrive, glowing with the hunger to belong. I recognized the look. Months later, I received a message from Hannah. She had found me through someone else and wrote in short, careful sentences. She said Pastor Joel had asked to meet privately and framed everything as spiritual guidance. When she resisted, he called it rebellion. She told her parents, but the church called her unstable and confused. They suggested therapy instead of accountability. I read her message 3 times. The next Sunday, I stood up during the service. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I said my name, I said Hannah's name, and I asked why obedience was always demanded downward but never upward. The room went silent, not with shock, but as if they were prepared. Mark approached me and asked me to leave while Pastor Joel watched without expression. I left. Outside, the air felt lighter, not because I was free, but because I was finally aligned with what I knew. Years passed. Covenant Hill still stands, full and praised. Pastor Joel writes books now about leadership and trust. Hannah is rebuilding her life slowly. She does not attend church and says faith feels different now, quieter and more personal. I no longer confuse silence with safety. My name is Lucas Bennett, and I learned that holiness without accountability is just power wearing a robe.